Peace. This is Marcus Sankofa Nix. I'm the host for the History Heals Talk series. Greetings, everybody tuning in, local, near, and far. Really excited for what I know is going to be a therapeutic, empowering conversation and discussion today. Just wanted to make sure I set the tone for what is going to be a wonderful episode. The first episode, I might add, of this History Heals Talk series. The motto and slogan is learn from the past, heal for the future. Learn from the past, heal for the future. I'm the founder of History Heals Consulting, and our main focus is to serve as a business devoted to supporting K-12 educators, educational institutions, or groups in the general area of mental health, wellness through the lens of African American history and culture. That's the focus of the Business History Heals Consulting. And so how can we use diverse and rich experiences of African Americans, those of African descent, those who are Africans born in America, so on and so forth, to inform our wellness practices from a societal level, a community-based level, on to a personal individual level. So with this platform here, as I said, this is the first one of many to come. The purpose is to provide therapeutic conversation that offers a blend of history. We'll talk about mental health issues and wellness, and we'll talk about present day issues and topics and how it's all related because everything is interconnected and intertwined. Also, we'll provide practical wellness strategies that can be implemented day to day. We'll provide resources that'll aid and support you in mental health and wellness and understanding the more complexities of African American history and culture. And so in this space and in this platform, this is a safe space and a brave space. We're family here. And so just consider this platform as another part of your community where you can tune into on a weekly basis to get some good discussion and therapeutic conversation that you can apply for your day to day. I also want to give some call to action so you can continue to support us so we could do what we're doing here with our talk series. So if you want to get at me and stay connected, you could go to IG, Instagram, at History Heals. That's the handle for that. Facebook, History Heals Consulting. We have a page established for that. You can hop on over to LinkedIn, Marcus Sankofa Nix, and there you'll see our History Heals Consulting page and our posts and whatnot. And so also check out our YouTube platform, History Heals Consulting. Our episodes will be there. And then most certainly our website, historyhealsconsulting.com. Hop on that to see what it is that we offer by way of supporting educators, teachers, administrators, school districts, and school systems by way of wellness groups, webinars, workshops, professional development, trainings, so on and so forth, in terms of how we can be informed in regard to history and how we could apply those lessons of history, in particular, African American history and culture moving forward. And so before we get into our conversation, before we bring on our guest, and I really don't want to call her a guest, I consider her like family. We just recently met each other, but connected so well. I wanted her to hop on the platform and have a conversation along with me for the community. But I wanted to say this before we get into the conversation at hand. What it was that made me think about going into this Business History Heals Consulting. I am from out of the school system, the public school system, the K-12 school system of Howard County, Maryland. I've done a lot of community work throughout the state of Maryland, Howard County, Baltimore City, throughout the country and beyond. And some of the things I've recently discovered was especially when COVID-19 happened, the pandemic that recently happened, 2020 moving forward. I noticed that there was a lot of educators who were having a hard time. A lot of school systems were having a hard time, parents and students alike. And I recently, at the same time, while COVID-19, the pandemic was happening, I was in the process of working on my master's thesis and the master's program at Morgan State University, African American Studies. Shout out to Morgan State University. And my focus in my thesis was a segregated education of Blacks in Howard County. Um, and one of the things that I realized was just the value of understanding what these historic Black communities did, what these historic educational institutions did, and how what they did really could be inspiration and the beacon of hope for the future, as we found so many educators being burnt out, being taxed, being drained. We see school violence increasing, the erasure of history continuing to ensue. We see various books being banned, various aspects of Black history curriculum being pushed away. We see heritage sites and cultural preservation spaces struggling to keep their doors open. We've seen just a shakeup in the school systems and even beyond the school systems. We see that mental health and wellness, these are things that many people are having a hard time trying to grapple with, and people trying to keep it together. So the purpose, once again, of this space is to have therapeutic conversation and provide some tangible resources and thought-provoking discussion on how we can work together as a community, using the lens of history to inform our practices moving forward. There's a quote that I wanted to raise up to help frame the conversation that we'll have. And that quote is by Dr. Joyce King, a historian, author, a professor, a scholar, and out of the book, The Healing Power of Education, Afrocentric Pedagogy as a Tool for Restoration and Liberation. She gives this quote. She says, African American experiences serve as a pedagogical tool and an educational model, indispensable not only to heal the Black community, but also for the health and wellness of everyone in this society. A society traumatized from emotionally and spiritually from racial domination. So with the work that I've done in the museum world, as a museum curator, as a storyteller in the educational system, one who has done work in the urban environment and urban spaces and in wellness centers, being in different spaces and different communities, I would say that history can be a beacon of empowerment and can be a vehicle of healing, not just for Black folk, but for everyone and all of humanity. And so we'll talk more about that and unpack that more in our shows, but just wanted to lay the groundwork for our conversation moving forward. And then I also would be remiss if I didn't take time to be intentional and acknowledge the ancestors, those who suffered, bled, and died, those who were the original inhabitants of this land, those African ancestors who gave civilization, art, music, science, math, culture, writing, medicine, literature, philosophy, and so many things to the world on up to present day, those who have lost their lives to hate crimes, injustices, those who have suffered at the hands of racist hostility, those who have sacrificed and dedicated their lives so we could have the quality of life we have today. It is those individuals, those heroes and sheroes whose shoulders we stand on today. So I just wanted to make sure I recognize those individuals and those collective individuals as we move forward. Today, I am honored to have with me Alize Scott-Nowell. All right. Alize Scott-Nowell is a director of social justice and racial equity at the YMCA Jamestown, where she utilizes her expertise to build and implement programs that foster meaningful conversations about social justice issues with people of all ages. She is also an adjunct professor at Jamestown Community College, where she's liberating minds on a daily basis. And she links relevant historical context to current contemporary issues in an introduction to sociology course and an inquiry course titled The Black Experience. Coming from a multicultural and multiracial family, she has always been sensitive and passionate when it comes to issues that affect various communities. And building upon her familial knowledge, she has been able to get her degree in sociology and then move on into getting her master's in American studies with a concentration in African American studies in 2022. All right, so we're kindred spirits in that regard. And she aspires to use her personal experience and educational background to actively work towards creating a better society and striving for the common good for all. And in her free time, she enjoys spending time with her family, reading, and even playing the guitar. So she's multi-talented and multi-faceted. Professor Alize, how are you doing, my sister? How are you doing? Thank you for joining the platform. Thank you for joining the talk series. I'm honored to be alongside with you today. How are you? Talk to the people. Talk to us. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me today. I'm very excited for our conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I have to slow it down, make sure that my excitement doesn't get the best of me, because recently we connected for those tuning in and listening. We connected at a major conference that was in Buffalo, New York, actually right around your way, not far from you, Alize. For me, it was a little stretch. I'm coming from the Maryland area. It wasn't too far, but I had to, hop on a plane and make my way up. And so we attended the 6th annual Teaching Black History Conference in the University of Buffalo that was provided by the Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education. Shout out to Dr. LeGarrette King and his team up there doing some extraordinary work. That weekend was powerful and impactful. I know Professor Alize, my sister, we talked already about how meaningful, how important, and how special that energy was, how insightful that weekend was. I came to your presentation and you dropped it real heavy on us. You gave us your research and your findings. Yours truly, myself, was able to also present and share some of my research and my findings in the field as well too. And so from hearing your presentation, I was feeling it from beginning to end. I could feel the passion, the devotion. It was well researched. I loved how you captivated everybody with your information, and so I wanted to continue to peel back the layers, so to speak, of what it is that you have been able to uncover in your research and the work that you do in Jamestown. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I remember you shared with me this whole notion of Black joy as an act of resistance and a means of refusal. Black joy as an act of resistance and a means of refusal, which is really the focal point of our show today. And so I want you to set the tone for us, share with us your research in that area. And I'm sure there's probably a lot that you could say. So I know sometimes like, well, geez, there's so much. Where do I begin? But do the best you can to give us some of the research or the highlights of your research and why it's relevant today. Why do we need to focus in on this? And then how does this tie into this whole notion of healing? How does this all tie and connect? So flesh it out for us, sister. Talk to us.
All right. So I'm going to start from why it's relevant and then kind of work backwards from that.
Okay.
So my thesis for my master's was Black joy as an act of resistance and a means of refusal. And really how I came up with that concept is obviously during that time when I started my master's program is right at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement during 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. And I just remember scrolling through my social media and, I have various people from all walks of life on my social media, but seeing the difference between the Black people and people of color on my social media feeds compared to some of my white colleagues. And it was just so confusing for me, I guess, for lack of a better word, seeing, my Black colleagues, friends, and family members posting this tragedy, posting their feelings, posting just how this was impacting us in such a negative way, constantly seeing people that look like us being murdered and broadcast for everybody to kind of consume our pain. And then seeing on the opposite side of that, some of my white colleagues, friends, and family members just going about their day and posting, the regular selfie or what they're eating, whatever it may be. And I was just like, how are you not enraged? How are you not all consumed by what is happening? We literally just witnessed a man being murdered. Just the tragedy of what that was like, hearing him call out for his mother, all of that. I was just so confused that my entire feed wasn't just about George Floyd. And it made me so angry. It made me so upset. And I was like, how dare you be happy when we're not supposed to be happy right now? Like, this is not a happy time. And it really took me a while to get to the point to understand, wait a minute, I do need to bring some happiness into this. I do need to bring some joy into this in order to heal myself, in order to heal my community, and in order to kind of reconcile with the fact that this is the reality of being a Black person in America. And while we have to acknowledge that, we can't dwell there. We can't dwell in this pain and this sorrow, despite, this being a constant thing of putting Black pain on display, putting Black pain out there for consumption. We need to find a way in ourselves, within our community, to also focus on the positive. So a lot of times when we think about Black history, even within our own community, but also if we're looking at it from an educational standpoint and how it is taught to us, oftentimes it is taught through a trauma lens. It frames Black life and the Black experience as that only rooted in trauma, tragedy, struggle, and totally disregards all of the other stuff, all of the other side of that, the happiness, the joy that we're able to cultivate in spite of all that, but also just because of who we are as people. And so that is really what sparked me to write this, to start to dig into this as my thesis topic, because I'm like, this is more important now than ever, is that we recognize that we need to be cultivating joy on a daily basis, not just in response to these tragedies that are happening. So as I was kind of doing my research, I touched on a few different things. So of course you can't ignore the historical elements. So I kind of dive deep into just where this concept of consuming Black pain came from and how it is just this continuance within our society. It has become so normalized that sometimes we don't even bat an eye anymore when the next video pops up of, a Black man, a Black woman, a Black child being killed in broad daylight, whether it's by authority such as our police forces, or just people who have taken it upon themselves to become these authority figures. And I dive deep into that by looking at the history of lynching in this country, really the spark of consuming Black pain. Because if you aren't aware of the history of lynching, they made postcards, they sent it out as invites like, oh, sorry you missed it. Sorry you missed the picnic. Like, this was a spectacle, a public spectacle. So I dive into that and then kind of move on into these resistant elements that are often forgotten when we're talking about slavery here in America. So again, we focus on the tragedy of it, which is very important, but we often miss the resistance. We miss the revolts. We miss the little hidden kind of resistances that are happening, like when Black people would escape to the woods and have these kind of dance parties and just really connect and enjoy each other's companies outside of the gaze of white supremacy, outside of the gaze of these systems that are trying to keep them oppressed. And then kind of moving on and fast forwarding to how we do that now with the use of these kind of counter publics, these online counter publics. So we have Black Twitter, we have Black TikTok, all of these kind of social media platforms where we have created our own spaces to help cultivate our own joy. So we see the hashtag Black Boy Joy, Black Girl Magic, whatever it may be, but really just to highlight, again, the importance that while our timelines are going to be flooded with these tragic videos of George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Ahmaud Aubrey, we also need to be pairing it with the fact that we are happy people. And on top of that, I also get into the myths that come with being a happy group of people while at the same time experiencing tragedy. So even during times of enslavement, when we see, Black people being happy or whatever it may be, the myth of the happy slave kind of came about to kind of say, oh, well, your issues can't be that bad because look at, you're smiling, you're singing, whatever it may be. And even now, when we fast forward to the highlight of the Black Lives Matter movement, when we're bringing in songs like Kendrick Lamar and singing at these rallies, at these protests, people are like, well, how are you able to still be happy when you're protesting the murder of somebody? But when we dive deeper into this, it just goes back to really, I always bring in, the signifying monkey and satire and the use of it in the Black experience and how it really is this way to, again, escape the gaze of white supremacy and a way for us to communicate with each other in these kind of hidden messages and connect with each other without being influenced by outside society, without them really knowing what it is that we're talking about, but really just so we feel connected as a people. And then again, some of the other research that I did is really just the importance of something known as pleasure activism. So this is something that I discovered through this book. I don't know if you can see this, but this is by Adrienne Marie Brown. And
Okay.
so she just really talks about, while we're doing this kind of work, if you do want to be an activist, if you do want to, fight the good fight while also experiencing it, which we know can be so difficult, we need to make sure that we're centering pleasure. So that's kind of how I end my thesis, is the importance of making sure that this feels good to us. It can be so daunting to be fighting this fight and also experiencing it at the same time. You feel like you really have no means of escape, but really just making sure that we're focusing on the importance of joy as we are doing all of this. So I know that was a very long-winded answer, but
Well, no, it was you fleshed out a lot of things, and you said a lot of wonderful things that I think we can go down a few different lanes
yeah.
from what you said. So I appreciate you laying that out. You said so much. I mean, even from the pleasure activism piece that you just spoke about, I think, and you and I talked about this recently, I think, especially where many find themselves in this day and age, we oftentimes feel guilty to experience pleasure. And I would even suggest that on that continuum, right? There are those who may not want to experience pleasure. They'll feel guilty. They'll neglect themselves because they are spending so much time trying to support their family, their children, their community. So self-care. And, I think about that when you say that. But then I would say on the flip side, we also know that too much pleasure can also not always bode well for us as well, too. Because we can have the propensity to have addictions, and I don't mean just addictions in terms of narcotics or substances.
Right.
Addictions can take on many different forms. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because once again, in this platform, we want to have authentic conversations about our healing. And I would definitely say, even how history is taught, how I learned it young as a child, and what I noticed even in the field of research, oftentimes we don't think about the Black experience with a whole lot of pleasure. It's a gloom and doom, deficit-based set of stories we get. You know that, Alize.
Right. Yeah.
And so even when I've done oral history work, doing some genealogy, trying to, dig a little deeper in my family history, I've talked to them. I've said, well, how was it like growing up in North Carolina? How was it like, growing up, what was your upbringing, your childhood, some of the cultural rituals, the family traditions and whatnot. And what's interesting is, and this is why I believe it's so important for us to tell our story, our voices matter, because they don't just harp on the day-to-day racism and the discrimination. I mean, yes, that was there,
Right.
but they speak about, the family traditions. They speak about the education and the sense of community and the love and care that they had for each other, and go into those HBCUs. And no, we know that all families are not a monolith. Not all families are the same or equal. But to what you're saying, I do think it's important to provide counter narratives. I do think it's important, like you're putting forth, to also provide the more complexity, because our experience, or I'll say the African American experience or the Black experience, and I know there's a lot of terminology and names, but I would say it's more than just the sum total of its suffering, its pain, its sorrow. It's a part of that, but that's not the totality
Right.
of our experience. And so I'm glad that you fleshed that out. And I also like how you put forth this notion of creating space. Creating space. What I'm in right now is a museum, Howard County Center of African American Culture, where I currently serve as the curator. I see it all the time when I'm here giving tours, giving people a walkthrough, giving them that enriching cultural experience through education and storytelling. Spaces matter to be able to not have to overprove your humanity, support, and being your authentic self. And so continuing to carve those spaces. We've always, as a Black community, had spaces, whether it was the barber shops or the beauty salons, or whether they were museums or grassroots organizational structures, wellness centers, or even the church, so to speak. I'm thinking of the civil rights movements and stuff like that. So anyways, I love what you put forth. Tell me this, why, and you fleshed out this before, but why is this so important to you? Because I could feel the passion. Why is it so important? And well, yeah, so answer that, and then I'll get on to some of the other things I want to hear from you. Why was this so important? Because in the world of things that could be researched, that could be, reflected on and written about, why did you hone in on this?
Yes. Okay. So there is a quote that I had included in my research, and it's slipping my mind who said it, but she said that when your very being is a threat, to live your life joyously, noisily, and without shame or restriction is powerful. And so that is really how I feel about why we need to be centering joy. It is such a powerful thing. And it really, again, when you think about what it means to be Black here in America, when you're looking at it from a historical perspective, and then even seeing that continuity today, as far as the state-sanctioned violence that we see against the Black community still, to be a joyous being when you are a threat to society, it's so important, because again, this tragedy, this trauma is really supposed to, it would stop anybody else in their tracks. You know what I mean? Like, this should not be something that we are able to survive, and if it is, it should not allow us to be able to cultivate any joy. So the fact that we're able to do this despite everything around us is just such a beautiful thing to me. And it also makes me think of another quote by W.E.B. Du Bois. So
Oh
this
man.
is something, yes, I love him.
Yep, yep.
So in one of his writings, Dialogue with a White Friend, he says, "This is the truly marvelous way in which you prove your superiority by admitting that our love of life can only be intelligently explained on the hypothesis of inferiority. What finer tribute to possible courage?" And I just think that that is such a beautiful thing. Again, when we're thinking about the Black experience, and we're thinking about, again, the myth of the happy slave and all the backlash that people received by kind of turning these Black Lives Matter protests into parties by including music. It's just beautiful to me that despite everything that we have gone through, despite everything that we will continue to go through, we are still a happy people. That is just so ingrained in our soul and our beings and who we are as Black people. And I feel we need to celebrate that more. We need to highlight that more. Because again, I just feel like there's no other way to say it, but that it is just so beautiful who we are as a people and as a community.
I thank you for sharing that. There's a book called My Grandmother's Hands, The Pathway to Healing and Mending Racial Trauma, Resma Menakem, shout out to him. He speaks earlier on in the book, can't remember what page it is in particular, but he speaks about how we lose context.
Mm.
As people, we can go through situations and circumstances, and it's easy to lose track when we go through traumatic ordeals and highly stressful events. we respond to them in certain ways, fight, flight, freeze, faint, whatever. And we go about our life and things that aren't normal or shouldn't be, because these are responses from what we've been through. They become hardened in us, they become normalized, and it becomes our personality, and we lose context and we forget, in a sense, who we once were. I think about that when you say what you're saying. We forget the fact that joy and wholesome living, this is us, and we can get back to that. We don't have to move about in a state of survival, or we don't have to move in a state of hopelessness and powerlessness. And I would even suggest and even say, I don't even think that, like, I see many groups and many people that move in this way. And I think we see just the accumulation of so many things happening on the political scene, in terms of the social media. I think definitely social media can be a positive, but got to be careful what we're taking in and what we're ingesting. And there's so many different things out there. So protecting our precious, delicate minds, protecting our mental. So it's a lot to it. It's a lot to it. You spoke about music, and you spoke about, that influence. And one of the things that really caught me when you were presenting at the conference, I got the book here, Sounds of Blackness, the 50th anniversary of hip hop. We had a good old time that weekend. One of the things that you spoke about in particular was this connection to the water, the connection to the water. I'm sitting here drinking my water right here. I got a couple of books here, Sailing to Freedom, Maritime Dimensions of the Underground Railroad. I got here the Many Rivers to Cross, African Americans. I know Henry Louis Gates did this piece here, and I know some of us may have different views about him. But nevertheless, I see Crossing the Danger Water, 300 Years of African-American Writing. All of these things I'm raising up or referencing water in some way. And when you gave your presentation, I was thinking about libation and the way to connect with the ancestors and how they are, from an African-centered perspective, they're always here with us. And baptisms. But you really came from an angle that I hadn't really seen so much. So how does the water and nature tie into this healing piece? And how does this tie into what you're saying about this Black joy piece? So break that part down, if you will.
Yes. So when I gave my presentation and talking about water, I started by talking about kind of the shift in identities that we saw within the Black communities. So as we are starting to immerse ourselves more into this new culture of America that is forming, we start to leave behind our African chants that appeared within our music. And these African chants often alluded to our freedom being connected to returning to the motherland. But as we were able to participate in Christianity, that kind of shifted a little bit. So it was no longer about returning to the motherland, but instead getting to a promised land. And often that promised land was, the afterlife, it was death. And when we're looking into Negro spirituals that often talked about this, a lot of times they alluded to water and the means of water in order to get to the promised land. So you have, Wade in the Water, Roll Jordan Roll, all of these kind of songs were talking about we need to use water as a means to get to death, which is going to be a peaceful area for us to be in, free of burden, free of threat, free of violence. So as we're kind of looking into this, I tied into the Igbo landing. So this mass suicide, one of the largest mass suicide that is known in history, where a group of enslaved people who were coming from Nigeria were able to kind of take over the ship. And instead of going into slavery, they said that the only way for us to really return to ourselves, return to freedom, is by drowning, is by dying by way of suicide. And so they join hands and they walk into the water, and that is what happened essentially. And it was really this way that the water was going to bring them back to where it was that they came from. It was going to bring them back to their homes, essentially to Africa. And so when we're thinking about this and we're thinking about, mental health and all of this stuff that really came up in conversation, especially surrounding the Black community in 2020, we can think about what this really means, what water means to our healing, and also what it means to think that the only way for us to kind of escape the burdens, the threats, the forces of society essentially is by dying by suicide. And in my presentation, I also alluded to this idea of menticide that was brought up by Bobby E. Wright. And is suicide really a concept that is within the Black community, or is it this forced genocide that we are creating our own destruction essentially because of the factors and parameters that have been set within society to see us as a threat, to really encourage our death, whether it's state-sanctioned violence or, again, by us committing that on ourselves. So yeah, when we're thinking about water, it's really this sense of healing in a way that we feel it is the only means to escape, and it's this peaceful thing. But also when we're thinking about water, historically speaking, it was also a very dangerous thing for us, the transatlantic slave trade. And then in my presentation, I brought up even the Flint, Michigan water crisis, Hurricane Katrina, how water is also part of our destruction as well as part of our salvation. So it's a very interesting thing, and something that I just recently dived into when I was creating my thesis or writing my thesis. I just kept seeing these little hints and allusions to water throughout some of the research that I was doing. And I made sure to bookmark everything. So I'm like, I need to come back to this topic. There's a reason why this keeps popping up. And I just essentially just felt like it's something that is so important that we need to be looking into a lot more, especially when we're thinking about things like Afrofuturism and creating these realities where we are a people that is free from all of this stuff that ties us to our trauma. So I did bring up in my presentation the book The Deep by River Solomon. And essentially what this is an underwater community. So when we're thinking about history, Black people were either thrown overboard or they jumped overboard themselves as a means of salvation. And so this kind of talks about what would have happened if we were to have survived that, and thinking about creating these underwater communities where we are free of all of this. And there's only one person that holds on to our history, one person that holds on to our trauma and our tragedy. So that way the rest of us can simply be. As a Black person in America, it's very difficult to just simply be, to just simply exist, and not have all of this other trauma that is connected to you because of the history that you have. So this book does a really great job in looking into what that would look like if we were able to just simply exist. And then another book that I just recently started to dive into is this one, Water and African American Memory. So again, just looking at what water means to us as a people and how it can essentially be part of our liberation. And I know, Marcus, you were able to kind of tie in the church as well and baptism, and you sent me these wonderful resources about just our religion, also a religion that is very prominent within the Black community, and what our baptisms mean. Again, tying in that element of water to help us get to a point of liberation and freedom, whatever that may look like to us.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm thinking about the concept Sankofa,
Yes.
which is a name that was bestowed upon me, but return to the source, go back and get
Mm-hmm.
it. That source being water, and we know that water is essential for life,
Yes.
and water. Our bodies are comprised of water. I don't know the percentages and stuff, but I know our bodies very much so they need water, and much of our makeup is water. So I appreciate definitely wholeheartedly what you're rolling out and what you're saying. And yeah, I mean, when you think about water, there is that dichotomy,
Mm-hmm.
there's a trauma piece. I know some people that don't swim, they don't go near the water, they don't
Right.
deal with it. But then on the flip side, as I said, and as I draw this book back out, there's research and there's scholarship that says, well, hey, when we on the Underground Railroad, and I'm in the exhibit right here, shout out to Cheryl LaRoche, Geography of Resistance, Underground Railroad. Sometimes we took to the water quicker than land because we could get a schooner or a ship or a boat or a canoe and get from point A to point B further and more quicker, and not have to worry about some of the dangers that was on land. So absolutely. Before we run out of time, and man, time is just moving.
Yes,
But
it is.
yeah, give us your contact information. How can people follow up with you for more resources, just to connect with you and what you're doing? Put that out there for the listeners before we have to conclude for today.
Yeah, so I can be reached at my email, which is ascott, so ASCOTT at ywcajamestown.com. And as the professor side of me, I always love to connect people with various resources. So if there is a topic where you're like, I would love to learn more about this as far as Black history goes, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I will be more than happy to curate a list of various resources, books, documentaries, videos, whatever it may be, however you best learn, to help you kind of start that journey.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you could be here on the talk series with me. This is a big thing. I'm excited. This is the first time, the first episode, but just to leave everybody with some more resources and tips. I know we've been dropping books and dropping names and stuff, but on a practical level, as we think and reflect about healing, getting back to some of the basics, getting out in nature, I would say, and movement,
Yes.
Exercise, nutrition, what we eat, being mindful of that, drinking water, like we're talking about, drinking water,
Right.
putting that in our system. I would also say sleep, rest. And, obviously we can't get into everything on one show, but when we talk about that trauma, whether it's historic or intergenerational or contemporary or whatever the case may be, one of the symptoms is lack of sleep. And
Right.
so we know, especially, that lack of rest can lead to a whole lot of health issues, and it affects our health profile. Healthy relationships,
Mm.
that's important, And so these are some of the things that I'm sure many of us tuning in are aware of. But a lot of times it's not knowing the thing, it's doing the thing with
Right.
consistency and discipline. So I would say that. Is there anything else that you would offer up as well before we have to conclude briefly? Make sure that we have enough time. Anything else you would offer up, Alize, that you're thinking?
Just really the importance of making time for yourself, or like anything that again brings you joy, brings you pleasure, and not feeling guilty about that. If that's something that you're struggling with, is the guilt that's attached to it. There are so many various resources that popped up, especially during 2020. So online platforms, online therapy, whatever it is that you feel is the best way for you to work through this. I understand as a people why we have that guilt associated with our pleasure and our joy, but it's still so important that we're able to connect with that part of ourselves. And as Marcus mentioned, there are so many ways to do that: nature, music, food, whatever it may be, but just making sure that we are a healthy people, so that way we can continue the good fight. So
Absolutely, and there's wellness communities, in person as well as online. So there's much of that. Want to give my contact information once again, historyhealsconsulting.com, to the organizations, companies, businesses, educational institutions, teachers, educators. We're here. We're here to provide the services and the resources and support, especially as school is on its way in many places, as we're wrapping up the summer. I know some of y'all don't want to hear me say that, like, no, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready. But I'm here for workshops, wellness groups, and whatnot. Hop on the website. I'm on Instagram, History Heals, Facebook, History Heals Consulting, even X. I guess Twitter is now X. So at history_heals. And then Marcus Sankofa Nicks. That's my personal handle. That's also on Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. My email, info@historyhealsconsulting.com. But nevertheless, we're going to continue to have these shows, these conversations, these dialogues, because I believe they're important and they must be had. And so just some things, just as we wrap up, please follow us, like us, make sure that you tune in and you help us out by spreading the word. And so once again, I just want to thank you, Sister Alize Scott-Nowell. You're doing some wonderful work up in New York. Appreciate you being right there, ready, on point, to be a part of the conversation and to join with us today. So shout out to also Brother Ja as well. I know he said he was good, but still want to just give you some love, my brother, for producing and helping to put together this platform. But nevertheless, James Baldwin said these words: history isn't the past. History is the present. We carry our history with us. So just know that as we continue to show up in the world, in society, we all come from a past. No one is disconnected or isolated from their past, whether it's on a collective level, a society, familial, or personal level. So every day, let's continue to work towards being better tomorrow than we were yesterday. And I think we'll be okay. And so with that being said, this is History Heals Talk series. We're going to go ahead and sign off soon, but just want to thank you once again for tuning in, the listeners, wherever you may be, local, near, and far, and also my sister, Professor Alize. Thank you for providing your research and your knowledge with us today. All right, so peace, love, and all that good stuff. Till next time, y'all.